Okay, let's begin again. We have been talking about properties of ideology and the importance of ideology from the perspective of the social scientific methodology. And in that sense, in the Marxian sense, if ideology is a kind of false consciousness, then it may still be necessary to understand the society. So Marxian political economy, at least according to Marx, is a kind of a critique of both capitalist ideology as defended by political economists such as Smith, Ricardo, Malthus, and Bastiat, other guys. And also it's a critique of the very reality upon which capitalism is founded. So this more general definition of critique is the first step to understand the importance of ideology and very important in this respect to understand the society itself. So criticism of ideology, at least, should be the starting point of science, according to this perspective. We will have the opportunity to discuss this again in due course, especially when we talk about Marxist political economy or in general Marxian economic methodology. Anyway, now we have been talking about the social theory that is possible from a naturalistic perspective to understand society and identify the cause and effect relations, but still without ignoring the hermeneutical element of the society in general. Hermeneutical element means basically the importance of notions, conceptions, and even ideologies that the agents have. And these are also an important force that influence the actions of the individual. So individual action and its effect on the social reproduction is an important point in developing an adequate social theory that can be used to understand society in general. So a candidate for such an approach is the famous transformational model of social activity and the notion of the duality of structure. This idea was developed by sociologist Anthony Giddens and British philosopher Roy Bhaskar, more or less at the same time. So according to this model, conscious human activity can be made only in given objects. In other words, it always expresses and utilizes some previously existing social forms. Besides the fact that society is irreducible to the individual, it's a necessary condition for any intentional human activity. This point is important. First, human activity is intentional in the first place. And also with respect to the relationship between individual and society that we have been talking about so far, we can say that society is something different, ontologically different from individuals. So it cannot be reduced to the individual. Society emerges from the actions of individuals, but nevertheless, it is irreducible to these actions. It's entirely different. So we have two different ontological perspective or ontological layers in the social scientific study. In other words, society and human praxis, what humans do, human action in general, both have a dual character. Society is both the material cause. Without society, intentional human action is not possible, and the continually reproduced outcome of human agency. This is called the duality of structure. Without society, we cannot act, but without our action, the society cannot exist. So social reproduction requires the active participations of individuals in the sense that they act and they contribute to the reproduction process of the society in general. This is the duality of structures. Social structures are both the outcomes and the causes of intentional individual actions. And also praxis is both conscious production and normally unconscious reproduction of the conditions of production. Duality of praxis. This is called by Bhaskar. The idea again is like Adam Smith's invisible hand, invisible hand as referring to the emergence of a social order on the basis of individual actions. And following Adam Smith, we believe that individual action is important in the reproduction of the society in general or the economic system in particular. So, but individuals do not plan what's going on in terms of the social reproduction process. We care only about our own individual problems, preferences, individual costs and benefits, etc., etc. In short, we believe in a kind of self-interested behavior. But on the basis of this self-interested behavior, collective action, in other words, a social order emerges independently of the individual actions in this sense. In other words, the social order or the invisible hand emerges by itself, and it is independent of the concepts and individual actions. Well, individual action is necessary for this invisible hand to emerge, but still it cannot be reduced to the individual action by itself. This is the idea of the duality of structure. So again, this distinction between people and societies leads to the distinction between the intentional human activity and changes in the social structure. Human action is characterized by intentionality and the capability of monitoring and controlling their performance. This capacity of monitoring also applies to monitoring activity itself. Man has a second order monitoring capability, which makes a retrospective commentary about actions possible. What's the meaning of this? It's very simple, actually. I'm sorry. We are beings who have some notions, concepts, thoughts about what we are doing, right? Without consciousness, it is not possible to act in the first place. So we know or we have an idea about what we are doing. But as a second degree, we have also an idea about the idea about what we are doing. The meaning of this is basically can be sought in the ethical plane, basically. We are doing this and because of that, but actually, is it right for me to do this in this way? This idea is based upon the distinction between causes and reasons, basically, or reasons are reasons as the causes is the general discussion in this case. Everyone has some reasons. We are capable of giving some reasons about what we are doing, basically. But the real causes may be different from these reasons that the individual gives. So I may think that, I may say that, as the capitalists usually say, I may say that I only think about the society. If I'm going to be rich, I will create some opportunities for employment, and this is good for the society and the nation in general. But in fact, actually, my real intention is to have some profits, right? Basically. So the justifications or reasons that I give may be different from causes that create my behavior, something like this. So this second order monitoring capability enters into this picture at that point exactly. I'm capable of thinking about my own thoughts or beliefs as a human being, basically. This is an ethical or moral activity in this sense. So I say to people that I always think about the society, but in fact, my beliefs are only individual and my intentions are only self-interested things and so forth. But at the same time, I'm capable of thinking or judging myself from a moral perspective. I say this, but is it true that I really think this way, or even if I really think this way, is it actually right from an ethical perspective? Something like this. This is the second order monitoring. Philosopher Charles Taylor calls this individuals or human beings are strong evaluators. You know, Homo economicus is concerned with increasing utility, but this notion of Homo economicus, according to Charles Taylor, is a kind of shallow conception about human beings. We are not simply concerned about our own self-interest in the first place. Sure, it's an important part, but we are also concerned with some ethical issues, right? Basically, in general. Remember the famous hierarchy of needs developed by Maslow? This is something like this, you know, ethical and moral aspects of individuals or moral concerns are much more important usually than simple mundane, so to speak, ideas of increasing our own utility. In other words, according to us, for example, Bentham says once, there's no difference between philosophy and Pushkin, and there's no difference between, in the sense, a human being and a pig in terms of satisfaction behavior and so forth. But according to John Stuart Mill, remember, he says, it's better to be an unhappy Socrates than a happy fool. You know, philosophy is much better than being a fool, or much better than self-interested behavior. Some activities are more important and more ethical and more noble in that sense than others. So in this sense, individuals are concerned with some deeper evaluations. This is the capability of second order monitoring about our own actions. So because of this, human action is characterized by intentionality and capability of monitoring actions. We are self-monitoring beings in that sense. Still, intentionality and self-consciousness does not apply to transformation of social structure, just like Adam Smith says, right? You know, the invisible hand emerges on the basis of individual actions, but it's independent of the plans or intentions of the individuals who participate in this social reproduction process. Because the properties of society and individuals are strikingly different from each other. In this framework, people, when they are acting consciously, generally unconsciously reproduce and sometimes transform the structures governing their activity. We usually participate in the reproduction of the social structures, but sometimes we are successful in changing the circumstances and even transforming these social structures as human beings, acting collectively, of course. For example, people do not marry to reproduce the nuclear family or work to retain capitalist economy, but unintended consequences of their actions lead to reproduction. This idea of invisible hand is the cornerstone of economics in general, right? Individual self-interested behavior will lead us to live in a happy society, in the sense that this society will benefit to everyone without our intentions or plans or our own actions. So from this, we can see that the change in social structures cannot be explained on the basis of agents' desires, though these desires may impose important limits on the change. So society or social reproduction process is much more dynamic than we can conceive, actually. Individuals actively participate into the reproduction of social structures, but still they are independent of our own beliefs, thinkings, desires, wants, etc. So in that, Bhaskar and also Giddens' transformational model asserts that people do not create society, for it already exists, and it is a necessary condition for human activity. Society exists before our own actions, and it's a necessary condition for our activity. Society must be regarded as an ensemble of structures, practices, and positions, which individuals reproduce and transform. So we reproduce this positional practice or positioned practice system. But these structures cannot exist independently of their actions. The process of establishing necessary conditions for the reproduction and or transformation is called as socialization, which means though society is only present in human action is always made in the context of social forms. Again, the same idea, duality of structure and duality of practice. However, neither can be reduced to or explained in terms of the other. This PON, Possibility of Naturalism, the book by Bhaskar. On the other hand, this transformational model, by allowing the human agency, regards necessity in social life as operating via the intentional activity of human beings in the last instance. So this is a very complicated picture of society and the relationship between the interaction between society and individual. Well, the idea of duality's structure is something like this. This is from his book, Anthony Giddens's book, The Constitution of Society. Well, there's also a Turkish translation of it. It was translated by myself, but I'm not sure if you can find it today because it's rather old. And this duality of structure distinguishes among three important aspects of society or social reproduction process. Structures, what are they? Rules and resources or sets of transformation relations organized as properties of social systems. So here we have this idea of social systems and reproduction of these social systems. And rules and resources. Rules is a hermeneutical element, you know, the rules that are important in shaping human action, individual action. Resources are also refers to resources that we can use in our actions. You know, they may be material or immaterial things. You know, our own position may give us the opportunity of saying some particular things or acting in a particular way. For example, in that sense, it's a kind of an resource for us. So these are important. Systems refer to reproduced relations, recurring relations, and they are capable of reproducing themselves continuously. Between actors or collectivities, there's regular social practices, you know, social institutions, socializations, or something like this. According to Marx, for example, political economy is a science that deals with the relations among individuals and the relations among relations. You know, commodity is a social relation according to Marx, and so is capital. So the relationship between capital and commodity is an example to the relation between relations. So in that sense. So the idea is the reproduction and the regularity of this or persistence of the social systems or social relations or social institutions in general. Structuration means conditions governing the continuity or transmutation of structures and therefore the reproduction of social systems. According to Giddens, society is something structured. This is the idea of structuration. You know, social structures are not given, they are continuously produced and reproduced by individual action. So they are constituted, and this process of constitution gives rise to the structuration of the society. That's why it's called structuration theory. Anyway, this is the schematic version of the transformational model of social activity. This may be a little seem a little complicated, but it's actually simple. You know, first, social structures here form the unacknowledged conditions of action. You know, within a certain social structure or social institution, for example, in the institution of university, I am an instructor, I'm a professor of economics, so I'm capable of teaching economics, at least that's the assumption, right? So this place of myself within this certain institution that is called university provides me with some opportunities to reach a wider audience, for example, right? If I wasn't a professor of economics, nobody would listen to me except my family. Well, usually they don't listen to me, but that's another issue, of course. But so this is a kind of an unacknowledged condition for my actions. For being a university professor, I am eligible to talk about some certain economic issues because I have the position as a professor within the system, within the university system. So what I say may have some weight, in short. So these unacknowledged conditions of action actually make individual action possible, makes individual action possible. And individual actions are continuously here, and reflexively, okay, monitored by ourselves. So this reflective monitoring of action is a continuous aspect of intentionality. Basically, we are capable of evaluating our own action, and through our actions, unintended consequences will produce some social structures, or at least they will contribute to the reproduction of the social structures. So this is a very interesting idea. On the other hand, with respect to the individual herself, we have these three layers, basically: motivation of action, rationalization of action, or justification in general of our action, and reflexive monitoring of action. So individual action is dependent upon this motivation, rationalization, and reflexive monitoring. Second order monitoring capability even is required. And through individual action, there will be through some unintended consequences, social structures will reproduce themselves. So this is a continuous process. Sometimes, of course, in certain cases, under certain circumstances, these social structures may change, may be transformed through individual actions in the times of revolution, for example, or in the time of crises in general, whatever. So maybe we should stop here because of the time limitation. Next week, we will continue from this transformational model of social activity. Okay, thank you very much.